Since we spent so much time on the Portland airport, we thought, you know what, this would be a great chance for a deep dive on a report looking at Oregon's infrastructure. It's like a report card on airports and dams and bridges and water systems and a whole lot more. Civil engineers, the folks who design those things, check up on how the systems are doing, and then they let the rest of us know. Here's a spoiler alert. In Oregon, the systems are doing sort of okay. Not exactly a glowing review here. Engineers say the entire system needs lots more money to make it support itself and to make it stronger. And by the way, they're looking at you and me as the source of that money. Surprise. Greg DiLoretto is an engineer and until 2013 was CEO of the Tualatin Valley Water District. In the past, he's helped write and promote these national report cards on infrastructure. Recently, he introduced the report card for Oregon.
I want to emphasize, this report is a reflection on the systems we have in place and their current and expected ability to withstand external stressors, such as increases in energy demands, population growth, increasingly severe weather, and shifting traffic patterns, which are factors we are seeing impact almost every state in our nation.
Here in Oregon, our overall infrastructure got a grade of C-. That's what the rest of the country got as well. So not great, but also not awful. I mean, it's just sort of bad. Here's one of the authors of the report.
Oregon's decades of population growth. As more people have moved to Oregon due to the high quality of life we have here, some infrastructure systems are now being asked to accommodate surging usage. This means that more people are on our roads and our bridges and relying on our water systems than they were initially designed for. Oregon's infrastructure is also showing signs of the consequences of decades of deferred maintenance. This is because we have been kicking the proverbial can down the road about fixing and maintaining our infrastructure. Despite recent efforts to address this, our infrastructure is still under immense strain.
All right, well, let's get into this. The report is brought to us by the Oregon section of the American Society of Civil Engineers. They looked at 12 different areas from aviation to wastewater treatment systems and found, well, lots of reasons for concern. As I mentioned, they gave Oregon overall a C-. We don't have time to run through each one, but let's take a look at a few of the areas where the engineers focused. Since we've been to Portland's airport, let's start with aviation. The airports combined also scored a C-. And here's something I found interesting. Oregon has 97 different airports. I don't know if you knew that. The biggest is PDX, of course, but there are a lot of small ones all around the state. And engineers, being who they are, well, they wanted to check the conditions of the runway and the pavement at all the airports, at least all those controlled by the Oregon Department of Aviation. And what they found is that 83% were either in good, satisfactory, or fair condition. The other 17%? Well, let's just hope your plane's not landing there. Other challenges, only 36 airports can store fuel, and with wildfires becoming more common, the engineers say another 20 airports should start storing fuel for firefighting planes. 16 public airports are located along the coast, and 10 are in tsunami zones, so if the big quake happens and the tsunami follows, they're not going to be much good to the rest of us. Moving on, let's go to bridges. The engineers gave Oregon bridges a C- as well. That's down from a solid C a few years ago. But, you know, there is some good news.
About 5% of Oregon's bridges are now in poor condition, which is lower than the national average.
Well, how about that? That is some great news indeed. Our bridges are doing okay, but at least they're not as bad as the rest of the country, right?
However, the age of our bridges across the state presents a serious problem down the road. Already, more than half of the bridges in Oregon are more than 50 years old and are approaching the end of their design life.
For crying out loud. There it is. I knew that was too good to be true. Oregon has 8,292 bridges, another surprising number, and roughly 22% of them are considered in poor or almost poor condition. Most of them are on the left side of this graph, which shows that they're 50 years old or older. The Oregon Department of Transportation reports that each year only 3 new bridges are built to replace the outdated bridges. So, of course, the engineers got their calculators out and punched in the numbers, and they figured out at that rate, an Oregon bridge would need to remain in service for 900 years until it's replaced. That's a big problem, because typically they only last 75 to 100 years. The engineers agree with ODOT, by the way, that the state needs to make a change and connects the gas tax to the rate of inflation to keep enough money flowing into the agency to keep up with the bridges and maybe fix more every year. ODOT also wants several other funding sources for its struggling budgets that we've told you about before. Tolls, anyone? Anyway, let's move on to the dams. Oregon has a bunch of those as well, 889 to be exact, and the engineers gave them a D+ grade, so that's not good. Our source for how they're doing, the Army Corps of Engineers, which has a national inventory of the 90,000 dams that are standing across the U.S. Here's what it has to show for Oregon. Let's start with all those little red dots there. Well, those are dams, 171 of them, with the potential for high hazard and loss of life if they fail. Now, 28 of those are rated as poor or unsatisfactory. Another 171 pose a significant hazard if they fail, and 547 are low hazard dams in Oregon. The good news is that Oregon has slightly improved funding for safety regulations on the existing dams and started an emergency action plan for the 76 dams that are regulated by the state and considered high hazard. The rest of those 171 that I mentioned earlier are not regulated by the state. Also, most of the big federally regulated or owned dams are in satisfactory or fair condition. So that's good news. Now, the bad news. In the next 5 years, 70% of Oregon's dams will be older than 50 years, which is their expected lifetime. 98 of those dams in Oregon are twice that, more than 100 years old right now. I found that amazing. The report says none are prepared for something like the big Cascadia earthquake, by the way. Finally, let's move to water and wrap up on a high-ish note. Our water gets a C grade, so passing.
More than 99% of Oregon's drinking water systems meet the Environmental Protection Agency standards for safe drinking water. Water systems in Oregon generally have stable supplies and are capable of handling future growth. Much of Oregon's drinking water network is relatively new compared to other parts of our country, with most lines installed over the last 50 years. This is really good news for us, as water utilities face new rules that will require the removal of lead service lines.
So let's cling to that good news. The EPA estimates only 3,500 water lines in Oregon are made from lead. That's less than 1% of all the water lines in the state. That's good. Lead in the water is bad. And they point to projects like this, the Washington Park Reservoir replacement in Portland. The original reservoir was built back in 1894. The new one is replacing it with a 12 million gallon seismically reinforced underground reservoir. It's expected to be finished by the spring of 2025. It's going to cost $211 million. Overall, the engineers issuing the report card say Oregon needs to pony up a lot more money to keep the water clean. Just the water, they say, needs $10 billion. How about that? So there you go. That's just part of Oregon's infrastructure report card. You can dive into the entire thing yourself if you'd like, all 137 pages. We have a link in this story on kgw.com.